All right. So anyway, as far as 152, here we are. And we're going through the incident response stuff. So it's these ones, these chapters today, getting the investigation started and initial development of leads. So let's start with that stuff, and then I'll talk about the attack framework in the project demonstrations later, because you've seen enough Splunk demonstrations, I think. So, all right. So when you begin an investigation into a security incident, you have to get some information, but you need to have specific information. You need to have something that you can use to find indicators of compromise. So something like IP addresses and times and particular machines to examine. And then you validate these facts to find out how serious it is and develop indicators of compromise. One huge problem is time zones. One thing you really should do is just set all your Splunk servers and Velociraptor servers and other servers, everything to universal time. Otherwise, time zones will drive you insane. You won't really be sure what happened when. This is the standard solution to that problem, everything in UTC. All right, so you got some checklists, the summary, how it was detected, the details of the systems, the network, and malware. These are typical things that you have to find. So you have to have a documentation system for your incidents so you can share it with teams and archive it, and you can review past incidents that might be related. And you have to put it somewhere where it is not part of the network that has been attacked. So you have to keep your notes somewhere else, somewhere offline on some other system, like a cloud service or something. Here's the summary. Dates and times. This, by the way, fit very much for computer forensics. All these things are more or less common sense, but you need to have these checklists to make sure you don't miss anything, and you should have standard procedures so you always do these standard things. So you record information of the people who did things, reported it, detected it, recorded this information, so you know who to ask later if you have questions, or if you need somebody to testify in court. You get the general nature of the incident, like what happened, how it was detected. It might be an AV alert or something. You get some general information about the incident. And then you get unique identifiers of all the computers, who's been using it, who's aware of it, is it ongoing, do we need to keep it confidential? These are important things to get hold of early. All right. And then you got incident detection. So you keep track of how it was detected and what information came from what sources, and then whether it has been validated. Because you have something like a person says, something bad happened on my machine, or you have some kind of antivirus alert. That doesn't really mean anything bad happened. People and automated processes have a chance of being confused and reporting something that's not really an incident, so you have to validate it, and then maybe you want to preserve that data. So then you see how long have the detection sources been in case. If you've got something like a intrusion detection system that has triggered, find out how long it's been there. Were there detections of this thing earlier? Did they just change the rules, like maybe update the rules and the new rules have a false positive, right? Like somebody saying, this would be the important information to determine if this is real or false positive. All right. And then your individual systems, you have to define the physical location and tag numbers, make and model, operating system, the people involved, all the network information, and what's stored on this system and what backups are stored. Those are all really important things to know. And again, whether it's still connected to the network, malware, including malware in the past that maybe wasn't really cleaned off, what has been done to this that might have changed things, like attempts to fix it, and what data has been preserved from it. This is why it's a really good idea to have a log server like Splunk that archives all the logs, so that even if the local logs are deleted, there's another copy of the logs somewhere else that won't be deleted. All right. And for your network details, of course, you record all external IPs and domain names that malware is using. Those are very useful. and see if you have network monitoring or perhaps remediation steps like firewall rules or something. See if you're preserving network log data of some kind, like perhaps NetFlow data, which is it's like a log for network traffic that just records this IP went to that IP for this long and for this many bytes at this time. Just a simple, not every packet, but just a summary of the traffic. That's commonly what you do. And then you have records. Of course, if you're restoring a complete PCAPs of every packet, that's of course the handiest for the incident responder, but that's a huge amount of data, and most companies don't bother doing that. All right, and some more details. When you have malware detected by something like antivirus, then you're going to have information about where it was found, file names, directories, type of file, whether it's active, whether it connects to the network, all the usual stuff you do in malware analysis that we're doing in the malware analysis class. And that you'll see, if you put it on Virus Total, you can go to a tab and it will just let you see all this stuff right away. It will run it in a sandbox and let you see what it did. So whether you have a copy of the malware, and then if you analyze it. If you analyze the malware yourself, which I've been told is now an increasingly desired job skill at companies, then you can decide indicators of compromise from your own analysis. Indicators of compromise are just ways to detect if a machine is infected by looking at network traffic, registry keys, files it creates, or things like that. Anything you can quickly detect to tell if some machine is infected or not. And if you did submit the malware to some third party like Virus Total, you should record that fact because that's important. You might have informed the attacker that you have begun to investigate the attack, and that might change what they do. So record what you do, be professional about it, but be complete. If you make mistakes, you need to record the mistakes and admit them and explain them. Don't make any attempt to cover anything up or lie about anything. It will be 10 times worse. I've done plenty of this. Just come clean. Nobody is perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. It's far better to admit your mistakes than to make any attempt to conceal them or excuse them or cover them up. All right. And so then you make a timeline. So here's a sample timeline. On this date, somebody opened an infected email attachment. So then it created a prefetch record which showed that he was running ipconfig. So the malware ran the ipconfig command in the background to determine IP addresses. Then it ran something called gsecdump, which I'm not aware of, but apparently that is some hacking tool that did this. Should you hash suspicious files? Yes, that's exactly what you should do. It's a very good question. If you have a suspicious file, don't upload it to Virus Total, because if you do, they will forward it to antivirus companies and they will add it to the database, and the attacker can query and find out that you did that. So what you do is you hash it, and then you send the hash to Virus Total, because that will not be recorded. All that does is search to see if they already know about it. That's the right thing to do. If you want to investigate something, use the hash, and then you'll find out if it's already known malware, but you will not expose that you're doing the investigation. That's the right thing to do. All right. And so then the next day he called the IT security department to say, I think I opened something yesterday and it seems suspicious. So you didn't find out until a day later, but there are some records in the system of some of the actions of the malware. And then, so after he reports it, then later comes the incident response team, and now they collect live response data using something like Velociraptor. Now they collect a standard amount of data from his system, which is what you should do. Get a list of the files, list of the network connections, list of the processes, antivirus logs, and all that stuff. You should have a sort of standard list of stuff to take from a system to examine to see if you can spot something wrong on that system. And therefore, you'll see the prefetch folder with these things, and you'll see maybe an antivirus log about this thing, and you'll have some clues to start from. All right. So when you're investigating, you have common priorities. Sometimes people want to know who broke in, although I would generally argue against that. You definitely need to know when it occurred and what they did, what systems they accessed, so you know what might have been stolen, and where to look for more evidence and more clues. And of course you want to know, are they still in the system, still doing more harm, still stealing more stuff? And they might very well be. In fact, logically, they usually will be. Because if you are just beginning the investigation, then they haven't been caught yet, so why would they leave? The only reason to leave would be they already finished their mission and got bored and left, which is possible. If they're a low-level smash-and-grab attacker, script kiddies will just say, I just want to steal like credit card numbers. Like that hack of Epic. They hacked into Epic in February, they stole a bunch of stuff, and apparently they just left because they really aren't like a nation state that wants to establish a permanent spy presence inside the network and track what you do. They're just sort of, activists that just want to make a stunt. So they want to steal some stuff and leave and then publish it later. And that's one type of attacker, but your more serious attacker will stay in the network persistently to just keep watching what you're doing. So here's other things you might want. If you have payment card information, credit card numbers, then you're going to need a list of all those compromised account numbers. You're going to need to follow up with those customers, tell them to get a new card, track their payment, offer them free credit monitoring and all that jazz. And you're going to check, of course, with your legal counsel. You may have all sorts of legal compliance and other consequences of having been hacked, which is why, of course, like Epic, everybody always starts out by saying, I didn't get hacked. Because if you got hacked, it's a huge pain. Now you have to go to your lawyers, pay an instant response team to come in, admit you've been hacked, offend all your customers, get bad press. I'd rather just pretend it didn't happen than do all that. All right, and so when you talk to management, it is quite common. One of the huge problems in this field is your technical people have non-technical management, and there's a culture clash there, so people often have useless arguments. Management typically does not care about the technical details, but what they need is to understand how to make decisions up there. So they say, don't babble to me about binary and network traffic and IP addresses. Tell me what happened in simple English. How bad is it? What are my choices? What are my options? How soon can you fix it? What do we have to do? How much will it cost? How long will it take? Those are the questions management will really need answers for. So you have to talk to them about reasonable goals. Management often has goals that cannot be achieved, like I want you to make a system with 100% uptime. And you have to say, no, nobody can do that. Google can't do that. The NSA can't do that. You can only get like 5 nines or 4 nines or something. And that sort of thing. So they're going to say, well, kick everyone out and make our system 100% secure. And you're going to say, well, I can't do that. But here's what I can do. So what you can do in a reasonable amount of time is you could make sure that the machines are restored to clean images and that you remove the vulnerabilities that were exploited that you can find, And, all right, but you should always make them aware. It's entirely possible that your first eradication event will not be complete. You will make everybody change passwords, change the firewall rules, update the systems, add another intrusion detection system or something, and then when it's all over, they will still be in there. They had a backdoor you didn't find, and like a week or 2 weeks from now, we'll have to do it all again. That can happen, and you should make sure management's aware that we're going to do the best we can, but we might not be able to find all the intrusions in the first go. Anyway, this is another reason why I say worrying about who did it is often pointless, because they'll typically use jump servers in foreign locations. So even if it's an American hacking you, they'll bounce off China or something. So you won't be able to tell who they are, and you won't be able to get any information from that server in a foreign country. And so, the odds of really tracking down who it is small, and you don't get much business benefit by prosecuting who it is. I mean, your real business benefit is just in improving your system so this doesn't happen again. All right, so here's an example. Somebody ran a vulnerability scan of a server. They found a vulnerability, like a management interface with a default password or something. Then they were able to upload files, so they used your web servers for an illegal purpose, selling illegal stuff. And this went on for a while, and when management found out, they got mad and they wanted to prosecute the attacker, but you can say, look, actually hunting down this attacker and prosecuting them is really of no value to our company. That's just something for the police to do if they care. What really is, this kind of thing happens all the time. It's much more realistic to just fix the systems so this won't happen again, clean it up, and carry on with doing our business, making money. The time you spend hunting down who did it and punishing them is just a waste of time. Anyway, all right, so let's take a look at some Cahoots. Sometimes you hit real culture clashes, though. When the first DDoSes came out, there was a guy who ran like a gambling site, I think in like Vegas, and just as a matter of pride, he refused to pay the ransom to get them shut down. He would pay $1 million more to make defenses, and it funded the company Prolexic that got started. So, sometimes there are people who have, a sort of point of pride. I will never give in, and I'm willing to pay 10 times as much to not give in, which is, there can be some value in that, but it is not the most rational, cold-hearted business decision for most people. That's why almost everybody pays the ransom for ransomware, because it really is cheaper than recovering another way in most cases. Did blockchain start with online gambling? No. The main blockchain is the one Bitcoin had, and that just started as sort of a libertarian project from people who did not want money to be controlled by governments. It was motivated by the devaluing of the pound in London in response to the financial crisis in 2008. Libertarian sort of gold standard money people felt like government should not have the ability to change the value of money. We should make some kind of money that the government can't control. That was the motivation, a sort of political liberty, freedom kind of thing. It was intended to be an electronic version of gold. Yeah, Randians, that's the kind of thing, yeah. And it worked in that regard. I mean, nobody can control the price of Bitcoin. That's what they wanted. That's what they got, right? If you want to change the price of Bitcoin, there's nothing you can do except like go on the exchanges and buy a lot of it to make it go up, or have a bunch of it and sell it to make it go down, but you can't control it with like a Federal Reserve or anything. So I think it achieved that design goal. Of course, gold still exists. You could just use gold too. Anyway, all right, I guess we can go. All right, which one of these is a false statement? All right, and of course, these are all saying essentially the same thing. They usually don't have an insider. There are some cases where you bribe an insider, and that's very powerful, but typically they're network attacks, often from a foreign country, and they don't really have an insider. All right. All right, which step is not normally performed on an individual system? Yeah, this one, of course, really happened at the college. When we had a security incident there, we had a crooked CTO, and when I demanded, well, let me see every other people with me saying, let me examine the system, he said, no, I won't let you examine it because you'll corrupt the evidence. So I've locked it up so the FBI can examine it. And I said, that's not a thing. And that was just some kind of lie to cover it up. Anyway, the FBI does sometimes get involved, but they don't care unless it's a huge amount of money or a critical national infrastructure matter affecting national security or something. If it's, if it's just a small college or with an intrusion of some kind of virus outbreak, then they can't be bothered with that, really. All right. All right, what detail is normally not important? Yeah, now of course, supply chain attacks are getting bigger and more people are getting worried, and they're actually worried about this. But of course, we really have no choice. All our stuff comes from China. We don't make hardly anything here. And so more and more people are worried about this. They're saying we really need to stop having all our chips and hardware come from China. But so far it all does. And it's not a very good idea, but there is no real alternative in most cases. So anyway, not yet. All right, I know who Jay is from last night. And Clayton, right? All right, and Rohit. Those all look like real enough names that I can identify them. That's good. All right. So, all right, so let's look at initial development of leads. So a lead is when you have some kind of data, some kind of fact about the attack, which you can use. Something that you can use to lead an investigation, like a piece of network traffic. I cringe when I look at where something is manufactured. Well, yeah, that's exactly the case. That's why a lot of people are getting upset. I mean, and if you look at the supply chain of your software, you install Python, you go to pip and install stuff from some repository, and that has dependencies from some other repository, and you go to apt-get on your Linux system and stuff comes in, and if you ask where all that stuff came from, you're not reassured. It comes from something donated by like Joe Hubcap 5 years ago to some open source project, and you don't even know what nation they're from, and you don't even know if you got the latest version and all that jazz. So people are getting more and more alive to this. Your hardware and your software has a supply chain, and that supply chain is very far from secure and controlled. So someone I know who works at a major military agency is in fact going through this a lot, because all the traditional things you might do on a Linux system are now being blocked, and they're saying you can't use any software until you actually do verify this supply chain. So you have to stop using a lot of casual things that we've all gotten in the habit of using, and instead only use tools where we can verify that we know all the components. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why we're waking up to this. A lot of us have habits of just like using apt-get and pip to install stuff from God knows where, and if you're working in a military environment, you have to knock that off. Anyway, all right, so leads are actionable information you can use that you can use to investigate something. Not just a random fact, but a fact that you can actually use, like somewhere you can go investigate and find more. So you got to have relevant lead. It has to not be a bad thing that happened. It has to be something that happened that really is connected to the incident. It has to be something you can use with enough detail that you can use it. So then you clarify the data, you verify that it is accurate, and get its context, and now you can use a lead to find more facts. And this is just what you see all the detectives doing in the cop shows on TV, and that's essentially what an incident response investigator is. It's the same thing, only it's on a network. Android phones are so insecure. Well, I suppose, yeah, with open source. Yeah, I don't know what TRU is, but anyway. All right, so for example, if your network intrusion detect system gives you an alert saying we saw a connection to a known malicious website, then you find the internal IP address and look at the raw packets if you can find them, look at other traffic from that host and see, well, now I've got a clue. Maybe this machine right here is infected or compromised in some way. So investigating that machine would be the next step to find more information. So if humans report something, then you should be suspicious. Now, your incident response system has false positives. Humans often misinterpret things. Like, if you're a teacher or anybody becomes known in the world of cybersecurity, you have an endless flood of people coming to you, somebody hacked me, you've got to help me. And 90% of the time, it's just a normal log. If first time you look at your firewall logs, you will freak and say, oh my God, look at all this awful stuff, because you don't understand what you're looking at. So humans often freak out and think they're being hacked when they aren't being hacked. So you act on your leads and you're trying to turn it into viable indicators so you can detect events that might be connected to this. And research and find more stuff here. So let's see, CNIT 128 taught me. Yeah, Android is definitely easier to hack. Yep, that's all true. Yep. All right, so all right, turning leads. So you want to turn leads into indicators. This is your goal. You have a lead, like an IP address, an alert from an IDS system, and you want to turn that into an indicator, which is something you can measure. Indicator of compromise is something you can easily measure on a system to tell if it's infected, like a registry key, a file with a certain hash, a mutex, which is a handle in the memory in the files used to refer to an object that's in use, this sort of thing. These are things you can easily find by running scripts on the system to scan and pick these up, or with the tool we're going to use, Velociraptor, makes it very easy to harvest all these indicators of compromise from systems. And you can just write a little script and then push it out to your whole fleet, so it will run this collection script on all your thousands of machines and then tell you which ones are infected. That's what Velociraptor is for. It's an instant response tool. So you can have different kinds of indicators. There are less suspicious leads, or less specific leads, where you look for a combination of characteristics that in themselves are not very unique. So, for example, unexpected executables in the help directory, that would be a suspicious thing, although probably not enough to completely indicate compromise in itself. And so here's what you do. You get data from the initial lead, then you create some rules, then you verify your rules by scanning a known clean machine, and if you can, scanning a known infected machine and seeing if it really is effective. And then you refine your rules. So your rules accurately detect the infection, but they don't trigger on a clean machine. And then you're ready to publish your rules and have what Velociraptor would call a hunt, which will now run this investigation script on every machine and report all the data back so you can see which ones have passed your test. All right, so you often have to modify your indicators. And this is true when you write IDS rules for things like snort. Now, what you really want is something that will just say it is infected or it's not. That's what you'd like. So to get that, you define some observable things. So we'll take a malware sample from this book that we're using in the malware analysis class. Your textbook did it too, because like I say, these books are both essentially Mandiant books from the same company. The book we're using in the instant response class and the malware analysis class are both Mandiant training manuals, essentially. And so you can look for, if there's a file on the machine with this MD5, then raise an alert. Now that's what the simplest kind of antivirus might do. Just if this exact file is there, then we know you're infected. Now that is got a very low false positive rate. That's essentially never going to happen except when you are infected. But of course, any small change in the file, like just changing the name of the author or the compiling date, would change the hash, and so it's not very effective in that regard. It has too many false negatives. And so you can look in the portable executable header, and we're going through this a lot in 126. All the executable files, which are exe, com, or dil in Windows, they all have headers, and the headers list all the library functions that are used. And so in the header, you have a sort of list of all the basic things this program does. And so you could do this. You could say if the hash is this, or if the header shows it was compiled on this date and it has that size, then raise an alert. That's a way to make it a little more broad, so that even if it was a little bit changed but still compiled at the same time and the same size, then it would alert. That might help. You could also try things like this. If it's this exact file, or if the DNS shows that you have recently been to this website, which means you're infected and it's beaconing home, that's the beacon domain name, or it has a service running, which is from the malware, or it has a file name with this name and the header shows this date, 1020, I wonder if that's a mistake. Anyway, or the file size, this is what you might have. This is the kind of detection rule you might have that would try to get this file and variations of the file. All right, so your goal is to get enough information to reliably detect it, but one that will not have too many false positives, and also that you don't have to analyze the malware too long to find it. You don't want to understand, you don't want to waste too much time, so you want to use something you can find about the malware that is characteristic and useful, but not too difficult to find, and not too slow for the scanner to process. Snort does this. And if you make a rule that is too complicated, Snort will start dropping packets. All right. So the import table is the list of all the libraries and the function calls needed for the program. And malware often uses a strange pattern of libraries, so you might look, if it uses these particular functions, then raise an alert. These are all pretty common functions, so I'm not sure this is a very good rule, but it's possible that this particular combination of functions doesn't happen to be used in common software. That could be. You'd have to test it and see. Maybe it is true that none of the software you're using at your system has this particular combination, and in that case this might be quite useful, because even quite a bit of modification of the program would probably not change it in a way that would remove these. All right, and then you can look for indicators of compromise that are not malware, which is increasingly important, because as we brought up in another class or a couple days ago, more and more people are not using malware anymore. Now, a lot of people still use malware, so malware analysis and malware investigation remains important, but your smarter attackers, your higher level attackers, are learning about lull bins, living off the land binaries. They're learning to attack people using existing tools instead of malware to avoid all these techniques. So here's an attack, for example. SethC is a handicapped accessibility file. So if you press Shift 5 times, it will then offer to open an on-screen keyboard because you wish to log in with some other technique besides typing on a keyboard, because perhaps you're handicapped and you can't type on a keyboard. And that's fine, but if you replace seth.c with a different file, then, like almost always, cmd.exe, then you press Shift 5 times and a command prompt opens as system. And now you can type commands in there and execute commands even though you didn't have a valid name and password to log in. It's one of the common tricks to hack into a system. And so you might want to detect if people have been doing that. So one thing you could do is look to see if the MD5 of SethC is the MD5 of CMD. That would be one way to detect that exact attack. And perhaps the compile time of CMD, but the problem is, of course, there are different versions of CMD. So that's not so good. So if you had two different versions of CMD, you could put in the two hash values and the two compile times or something like that, and then you'd find those two specific versions, which might be okay if your fleet really includes exactly these Windows versions and never anything else. But in practice, especially now that people are working from home on their home laptop, and God knows what version of Windows that has, you can't be making that assumption. So you'd probably be able to do it another way, and a simpler thing would be to say seth.c will be replaced by CMD, and CMD is bigger. So probably a more effective rule would just be, if the file here is bigger than a certain size, then register an alert. That means something bad has happened here, and minor changes caused by Windows versions and stuff would probably not change the effectiveness of this rule. So, all right, that's the kind of thinking that goes into writing a good indicator of compromise. All right, so here's one that looks for a debugger key. This is another way to do it. You can go into the debugger in earlier versions of Windows. I think Microsoft patched this after a while. And you can go into the registry, and you can put sethc.exe in here, so it will pop up another way to get the command prompt to pop up. I forget the details of it. It was around. It was kind of a cool attack for a while. Anyway, so you can look for this. Here's some writing these things in the open IOC format, which is something that Mandiant's kind of pushing. As far as I can tell, this hasn't really caught on. But they try to define this sort of XML-looking system to specify this. The goal is to have machine-readable indicators of compromise, so you can subscribe to a threat feed and have it just appear right in your system. And there are some versions of that where you can feed it right into something like Splunk or Snort or something. So here's ways to write these in Mandiant's open IOC format. Anyway, then you got network-based indicators, where you're going to look to see if traffic is malicious. And so you might want to see if certain bytes are present in the first bytes of a session, raise an alert. That would be one way to go. What's much more common is DNS monitoring. You make people use ordinary UDP-based DNS, and you make them use your DNS server. And then at DNS, you can find very much what everybody's doing. It's really convenient. You know every domain they go to, and you know what time they went, and you know what IP they came from. So, for example, if you want to find out if any of your staff is playing games at work or using social networks or porn at work, you can totally find out by monitoring DNS. You know where they went, you know when they went there, and you know who they are. So it's great. See if you can find a domain name that is the malware's beaconing domain name for command and control, then you can just look for anybody resolving that domain name, and those are the infected people. That's really nice, which is why a lot of network security people really freaked out when people like Firefox started switching to DNS over HTTPS, so it's all encrypted and you can't see the DNS anymore. That really ends this kind of network surveillance, which is extremely effective and easy. So if I was running a company, I wanted security, I would probably deny people the right to use DNS or HTTPS and say you have to use a non-Firefox browser or you have to turn that off and just suck it up. If you're going to be working in my comfort network, you'll have to use this kind of DNS so I can monitor you. Anyway, all right, so here's DNS. You just have the query right there. And so you can see the domain name. Domain names in the raw network packets do not appear quite in the way you think. You might think that a domain like practicalmalwareanalysis.com would be a string like that, but it's not. What happens is each part of the domain is broken up and it's a link before the labels. So it's 18 followed by practical malware analysis, which is 18 letters long, followed by 3, followed by com. That's how it is actually recorded in the packets you send. And you can see that in Wireshark. Here's a DNS request, and it is a query for practicalmalwareanalysis.com going to the domain name system. And you see down here, practicalmalwareanalysis.com, but that dot is not a dot of the usual type. That dot is just the character put in an ASCII list when you cannot see the actual character. The actual byte is 03. And before the word P in practical is 18. Which is the 18 in hexadecimal. That's the length of this. So that's the actual string that you're going to see if you look at the raw bytes, including 2 unprintable hexadecimal characters, 18 and 3. So this is the snort signature for that. It is content, binary 18, hexadecimal 18, followed by practical malware analysis, followed by hexadecimal 3, followed by com, followed by a null byte. That's the actual pattern of bytes that you'll look for, and then it will trigger in snort when you have this this traffic go by. All right, so then there's dynamic analysis, which we're doing a lot in the malware analysis class. So you run a TCP dump to monitor the traffic. You could use Wireshark too. Then you load the library in, call the message, run the malware, and then you see that it does make this query. So then you set up a server to respond to that query. And then you can see what it does, that it actually sent a request for serve.exe and so on. So this is one way to do the analysis to find what network connections. This is an extremely careful, sanitary way to do it. This way you did not send any traffic off of your network to really go somewhere else. What a lot of American companies typically do is just let it call to the real command and control server, just let there be one more bot for a few seconds. But some people would not like doing that. They would rather run in an isolated system with a fake internet to avoid actually sending any traffic to the criminals while they're doing investigation. All right, so now you verify it. Obviously, before you send a hunt that's going to run code on thousands of your systems, you got to check to make sure that your hunt is not failing. Your hunt might have various things wrong. For example, your hunt might not detect the malware efficiently, so you might fail to detect compromised machines. Your hunt might have false positives, so it triggers on clean machines. And even worse, your hunt might use up too much CPU and freeze the machines and cause them to crash or something. And then you're really not going to be popular when you crash thousands of machines on your network. So you got to test your live response script before you do that. All right, so here's an attack lifecycle, for example. This is the most common one. You send an email. This is by far the most common way you compromise a network. You send out phishing emails and get somebody to click on a link or run an attachment. Then you get a toehold in the system, some degree of control over one machine. So they run this thing, it drops a Word document, and it drops a malicious file on there, and now the malicious file will do something on the system, typically open a reverse shell back to the attacker so they can execute more commands on the system. So you've got a dropper, which is the original file, and your email scanner would probably record this. And then you've got, you can look for a prefetch indicator showing that something was executed on there. You can look for the innocent Word document. You can look for the API calls that were used, perhaps in the browser's history. You can look for DNS cache entries, like we were saying, for the network address it connects to. You can look for the second stage malware. These are all indicators you could use as indicators of compromise. All right, so you run your indicator on a clean workstation. All right, make sure that it does not trigger on a clean workstation. If it does, then obviously you need to improve your indicators of compromise so they do not have false positives. Then you have to make sure that it doesn't burden the system too much to run your script. This is why people don't routinely do things like image the entire memory or the entire hard drive, because not only does that burden the system, it ties up the network, and then you have far too much data to analyze. So this is something you do not do unless you have to. You normally come up with some much lighter weight thing to do, like just list all the running processes or something. Something that gives you a reasonable amount of data that you can quickly search through. So from humans, document the statement, make sure you write down what they say. An important thing is humans are confused and humans lie, so you really need a record of what they did. Try to find out the facts from the human, what Apple did with Big Sur. I didn't know about Apple lying about Big Sur. So many systems crawled on. Oh, yes, yeah, that happens to a lot of people, yeah, that their servers can't handle the load, sure. That's right, I remember that happened. My systems crawled on launch day too, because every Apple phone's home every time you launch an app. I learned about that. So on busy days, your machine slows down, which is kind of disturbing. Anyway, so get the information from people and know when you need to call other people like HR and lawyers and stuff, what would be trigger points. Now the problem with external leads, if you have leads that lead out of your company up to a cloud server or something, then you've got a problem because those people probably won't tell you things. If you call them and ask questions, they probably won't want to answer it. They won't want to give you logs, let you see DNS logs or anything like that. You can't compel them to, and of course they don't want to because it would expose the confidentiality of their other customers. And so unless you are the law enforcement agencies, you can't issue subpoenas or anything, not easily. So you got options. You can file a lawsuit to try to get that information, and you hear famous cases about like Devin Nunes, a Congress or senator, keeps suing people like Twitter and YouTube saying, I need to know who's putting these nasty comments making fun of me. That's a fairly common one, trying to get information from people. Then you can use discovery mechanism. If you file a lawsuit, the first thing that will happen is the judge will approve a discovery order, and then they have to give you some facts. But this is a lawsuit. This is sort of hostile. This will take time and cost a lot of money. Digital Millennium and Copyright Act allows you to do certain things very quickly and cheaply. And you can, of course, just report it to law enforcement like the FBI and then hope that they will do all the work. But of course, you don't know that they will. You don't know how long it'll take. You don't know that they will actually do what you want. Instead of like deciding that you're the person that did something wrong and investigating you, that's a fairly risky move. It's not, you started a process beyond your control that may or may not go the direction you want. So you can file a subpoena. Your legal counsel can do this, and they may be able to compel people to tell you something about a subscriber. Yep, the DMCA is the easy one. If you just want to take something down, you can just issue like a form letter, DMCA saying, we assert that we own this product and you should take it down, and most people will just take it down. That's why that's easy. But that's not the same thing as actually getting information. And here's one's got a link here. On Mac, oh yeah, I saw this one. Yeah, I remember this one. That was, I remember, when the Big Sur launched, then every Mac slowed down because every Mac phone's home every time you launch an app to make sure it's not a malicious app. And so I know it's very annoying. Yeah, that was a fun one. Good. Anyway, so, all right. And then you can report to law enforcement. Like I say, most companies avoid this. because it usually just opens a big can of worms and a lot of trouble and doesn't really benefit your company much. But that's the game. Now, of course, if you find child pornography, then you are required to contact the task force just for that. The innocent images or something. There's a special part of the FBI you have to report it to, which, as I mentioned in the news, unfortunately, they've been ignoring a lot of child abuse problems that they should have been dealing with. But anyway, you have to get it out of your hands. You have to report it. If you don't report it and get that stuff off your servers, then you become guilty of having owned and possessed child pornography, which is, I think, why Apple recently got in all this trouble by saying they want to scan everybody's phone to get the child pornography off it, and they want to scan iCloud the child pornography off it, because if they don't do that, they're in big trouble themselves. So that stuff is dangerous. The cliche, don't call the police. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, some stuff you have no choice. That's right. If you're a regulated industry, there are certain situations that you must report. If there's a crime of certain types happening, you need to tell law enforcement. That's why you need a legal department. Sometimes you have to tell the cops, but it's certainly not something you would do in the normal course of business. It would be much better to just solve it yourself than going to the law enforcement, because they don't work for you and they don't care about your profit and your company. They have other goals. So it's, it's not likely to benefit you very much to turn it into the cops for most incidents. Apple must have a big... I think this is something that happened about a year ago. Other people scanned their cloud services, and they found that there's a ton of child porn on cloud services. That's what I think motivated Apple. There was a report, I heard about it, I didn't see the original, that said all the cloud services found there's a ton of child porn on them. And that's what made Apple say, we ought to start scanning our stuff too, and we'll probably find a ton of child porn on it. And therefore, they're motivated to do that. But then everybody screamed about privacy concerns, and they're still deciding what to do. But I think you have to do something. You really can't just let child porn be on your systems. You can't allow that. It's a moral problem. It's a legal problem. Data in transit to your iCloud is encrypted, but on iCloud, Apple has the key. They have to have the key, because the primary point of iCloud is when you lose your phone, you can buy a new phone and you can get all the data off iCloud. And when you lose your phone, you've lost all the keys. So Apple can get your data unencrypted off iCloud. So they can scan iCloud for child porn, and from what I understand, they have been doing that. It's encrypted in transit, but it's not encrypted at rest. Or to be more precise, I think it's encrypted, but Apple has the key. I don't get how privacy is more important than morals. Well, the problem is that I know I have the same feeling. Like I say, if you're just going to scan for child porn, then I'm all for it. But the problem is, once you make a tool that can be used for scanning for child porn, what invariably happens is the government starts using it to search for their political enemies. This is what always happens. Like they did this recently in United Arab Emirates. They said, we need to have surveillance tools that we will use on people's phones to catch terrorists. So they wrote it, and then they used it to target environmental activists that were complaining about the oil companies. The problem is your idea of morals is not equal to somebody else's idea of morals. So you write it to get something horrible like child porn, and then they use it to jail their political enemies. That's the problem. Anyway, all right. So here it is. This is where you have to go. Child pornography and stuff, you have to go to the Department of Justice and contact these people and hand over the stuff to them. If you don't do that, then you're guilty of possessing it and concealing it, and that's huge trouble. You can't have that. You need to make sure that the proper authorities get that stuff and you don't have it anymore, or you opened up a world of pain. All right, and then if you have foreign entities, if some of your stuff is going to foreign cloud servers, you have foreign customers, foreign business partners, then of course you can't really expect them to cooperate with you at all, really. They might, but you can't really subpoena them or anything. They're not subject to U.S. law and all that jazz. Federal law enforcement agencies can sometimes get some cooperation from people in China and Russia and Iran and stuff to help prosecute people, but as you can imagine, that's slow and nobody's gonna do that unless you have an enormously important case, like international terrorism or something. Just somebody putting a DDoS attack on your business is not going to rise to the level of making anybody go to all that work. So if you are law enforcement, then you have a lot more power to do this stuff. You can subpoena people, you can investigate, you can arrest people. Law enforcement can do all this good stuff that you can't, as long as if they want to. And so if you do get law enforcement involvement, then you're going to have good documents, a nice chain of custody, a clear statement of what happened, and convey it in a clear and simple manner. And obviously your legal team should be involved here to make sure that you say careful things and don't make things worse for yourself by babbling about things you really shouldn't bring up. And there's a lot of groups out there. InfraGard is an FBI private-public partnership, and so is I'm in this group, I should remember the name, the High Tech Crime Investigators Association, HTCIA. There's other ones. There's various groups out there, and you should, if you're going to be a security professional, you should go to these groups and make friends. You should know some law enforcement people so that when you need to, you can call somebody and talk to them. If you call them out of the blue, the first question on their mind is going to be, are you the perp? If you have a prior relationship with law enforcement and they know that you're legit, you're the security officer at some company, then you've got through the first barrier. You've got somebody you can talk to. So it is part of a security professional's job to have contacts in law enforcement you can talk to. And this is one way to get them. Join some of these public-private partnership agencies. Start going to their meetings and listen to them talks and make some friends. Anyway, that happened with me when that crooked guy tried to claim that that he was turning stuff over to the FBI. He went to FBI agents at RSA, and the FBI agents he went to knew me already. They knew me better than him. My law enforcement contacts were better than his, and that turned out to be helpful in resolving the problem. So, yeah, that's the problem. You have to keep your contacts up to date. They do come and go. I don't know if my contacts are that good anymore, but they were pretty good at one time. Anyway, so this is 152, Chapter 5. It would be good if I launched the right cahoots. I've done that before. I launched the wrong cahoots, and everybody is baffled. University of Phoenix, yeah. Well, that's the thing. When you report incidents, that's, I think, the most common situation. You report things, but they never do anything. Or if they do anything, you never know because they won't tell you. So that's why, imagining you can hand it over to the FBI and it's all fixed. That is not how it works at all. 90% of the time you tell them and they don't care. It's not important enough. And even if they do care, they won't tell you anything about what they're doing. So, no, I don't see anybody ever get all the points. There's 1,000 points per question, but you have to answer in the first millisecond or something to get that. But I've seen people get pretty close. I saw people getting 980 a couple times yesterday, so I think that's about as close as you can do humanly. Now you can write bots. Caitlin did that. Caitlin used attack tools and hacked the coots. You can do that. Then you probably get 1,000. Then it really does answer in a millisecond. All right. All right, I'm gonna go, I guess. Yep. All right, so Tripwire has a false positive. What's wrong with that lead? That's veracity. A false positive is not true. It tells you something bad has happened, but it's not true. That's the point of being a false positive. That's a lack of veracity. Your tool is lying to you. All right. So every program and service in Windows is what? They're all PE files, portable executable. All right. All right, so what network protocol gives you the easiest and fastest indicators of malicious activity? That's it. DNS is wonderful. Very easy, right there. All the information you need, very easy. All right. All right, and which one of these is in the PE header? Yep, the import table. All the functions it needs to import from libraries, it needs that, and it needs it right when it first loads the program, whether it's malicious or legitimate. So it's part of the portable executable header. All right, there's a real looking name, and that's a real name. And that's the person that got them all right, both times. Good. All right. So that's it for this. I'll stop this recording.